I'm Stephen Coleman. I'm Senior Lecturer in Ethics and Leadership at the University of New South Wales in Canberra, teaching at the Australian Defence Force Academy. This is Reverend Nikki Coleman, also a PhD student at UNSW Canberra, and both of us teach military ethics at the University of New South Wales down there at the Defence Force Academy, both at postgraduate and undergraduate level. The main focus down there, the main course that we're teaching is an introduction to military ethics for undergraduate students. I also have played video games for a long time. Nikki, what about you?
I play a little bit, but I suck at it, which is probably not the right thing to admit in this room. I mean, I enjoy it. I enjoy the community. We have a large family of gamers, and so I enjoy playing, but I'm just not very good at it. I'm the dragon fodder, basically. Okay, so who here actually knows much about just war theory? Can you put your hand up? Yay, okay, some of you. So for some of you this will be a recap, and for some of this will be a little bit new. So we're going to recap what we do with our students in a semester and something that's been looked at for thousands of years in 5 minutes. So please excuse the rush. So there's basically three main ways of looking at the morality of war or the ethics of war, and it's kind of a spectrum. There's not really hard and fast stuff. So we're going to look at the spectrum. So at one end we have pacifism, and the idea of that is that all war is wrong and all violence is wrong. This is not very practical in the real world. I don't know if you've all seen the documentary that came out recently, Looking for Group, and the great quote which I'm going to use, which is, it's not World of Peacecraft, it's World of Warcraft, baby. It doesn't work well in the real world. There are people who, there are countries and there are people who are aggressors and who are evil, and we need to fight back against them. And same thing in the real world. Obviously, we're not going to talk about pacifism at all. The other end is realism, which is the idea that you can do anything or kill anyone to get your country ahead or to get your personal perspective ahead if you're doing it as a person rather than as a country. And we kind of revile countries that do this individually, do this on a global scale, and also individuals we actually put in prison. So anyway, so just war theory comes into the middle of that. And the idea of that is that killing in general is bad and war is bad, but that it's necessary sometimes and that we kind of need to limit it a little bit. Is this you?
No, this is you.
This is me. So just war theory is actually a theory that outlines the conditions under which war and fighting and killing can be ethically acceptable. So traditionally, it's basically been taken to have two aspects. So jus ad bellum, and so it's jus rather than jus ad bellum. So when you want to impress people, it's jus ad bellum. So it's the idea of the justice of war, and the idea is that you're looking at when is it right to actually go to war. So it's looking at things beforehand or looking at them in retrospect. And then the other flip side that's often looked at is jus in bello, which is the justice in war, which deals with what is the right way to go about conducting war. And there's now actually been a fair amount of research into a third aspect, which is jus post bellum, which is justice after war, which is looking at peace agreements and ending wars. Iraq is a really good example of that at the moment, and Afghanistan.
Yep. So the basic ideas of jus ad bellum, if you're going to be justified in going to war, there's 6 conditions that are generally talked about as needing to be met in order for it to be ethically justifiable to go to war. Some of these have made their way into international law, some of them haven't. Just cause is the most fundamental one, so there has to be a good reason for going to war in the first place. The other one that's really in international law of all of these more than anything else is this idea of proper authority. The traditional idea there being that only, say, the king could declare war, and it couldn't be some low-level commander on the border saying, well, hey, we're going to war with this state next door. These other ideas of right intention and so on are ones that come in the ethical part of the theory that don't really make it into international law. Basically, the idea here with things like this, if you've got just cause to go to war but you don't actually have the right intention, then there's something ethically wrong with what you're doing. It might seem reasonable, but it really isn't. Last resort, because war is so bad, because war is so destructive, you should try and explore all other reasonable means of dealing with the situation before you go to war, because inevitably war is going to be worse than those. probability of success and proportionality are sort of, in some respects, what you might call prudential concerns. The idea there being with probability of success, if you're not going to achieve anything by going to war, then you shouldn't go to war. It's ethically wrong to do it, even if it might be legal. Proportionality is really about, is this worth fighting for? It's going to be costly. There's going to be lots of death and destruction. Is it actually worth doing that in order to go through the war that you're actually about to fight?
Okay, so when we're looking at jus in bello, and I think this is where it gets really interesting in game development. For the war, so for conduct within war to be justified, it has to abide by two main principles. That of discrimination, which is basically who you hurt and who you kill, and proportionality, and the idea being what sort of force are you using. And I think the idea with discrimination is it's not just about well, both of these actually, it's not just about people, but it's also about things like infrastructure. So if you destroy a bridge that then can't be built for 50 years, obviously that is going to have a really big impact proportionally on your local community. Discrimination is often looked at about, are you killing the right people? Are you killing the civilians? Are you killing combatants, non-combatants and so on? And proportionality obviously kind of comes into that as well. Some weapons are inherently disproportional. So if we're looking at biological weapons or phosphorus, or if we're looking at nuclear weapons, which I'm not sure, was this Nagasaki or Hiroshima? But anyway, they obviously are not only indiscriminate because they kill everybody, but they're also disproportionate as well. Yep.
So I want us to talk a little bit about how some of these things actually make their way into video games. As I have grown up playing video games, I haven't played a lot of first-person shooters because they tend to make me feel motion sick, so I always tended towards big strategy games. But when I started to think about these principles of just war theory in terms of those big strategy games, I realised that a lot of those games actually incorporate these things in a subtle way. So you do find these ideas of jus ad bellum and jus post bellum recognised in some of these big strategy games. If you've got something like Civilization, for example, which is something that I played all the way through from Civilization 1, it doesn't stop you from going to war with anyone for any reason. It doesn't say, well, you have to meet these conditions of jus ad bellum in order for you to actually be able to go to war. But it does, at least in some subtle respects, penalise you if you don't. So if you go to war without just cause for war, then all of the other AI civilizations remember that. And they actually treat you worse in the future. Their opinion of you deteriorates if you go to war without just cause. If you have just cause, then they actually take that into account. And their opinion of you in the future doesn't deteriorate, and in some cases it actually improves. So this is something that's actually written into the AI of the game. Do you actually have just cause for war? Some of these other ideas of jus ad bellum, those other 6 principles, really can't be seen quite so easily. But the idea of just cause really can be. The AI actually looks at it and says, well, is there just cause here? If so, then we'll actually think better of you in the future, or at least we'll think no worse of you. If you go to war without just cause, then we're actually going to treat you worse in the future. Your opinion changes. And similarly with these ideas of jus post bellum, the just conditions of peace. If you make a just peace treaty at the war's end, when you decide how you're actually going to finish this war, if you extract humiliating concessions from someone, their opinion of you goes down and they actually treat you worse in the future. If you make a just peace, again, in a game like this, it's recognised both by the AI that you've been fighting against and the other AI civilizations in the game, and they say, well, we'll treat this person reasonably in the future, our opinion of them won't go down because they actually acted justly at peacetime at the end of the game. Now, as Nikki said, the idea of jus in bello is something that's much more common to see in video games, probably because there are so many of them that are just focused on what's going on within a conflict. And a lot of games, historically and up till now, have implicitly recognised these ideas of jus in bello. So, for example, GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64, this is sort of one of those classic games that people remember. And it actually requires you in places to take account of principles like discrimination. So one of the second mission in the game, you're penetrating an enemy base and there's scientists around, and if you kill too many scientists, you fail the mission. It's telling you have to abide by the principle of discrimination. Even though you end up blowing up the whole facility and killing them all anyway. As you're going through, if you kill too many scientists, you fail because you're failing that principle of discrimination. And you often find that missions in games will require you to abide by the principle of proportionality as well. If you destroy too much on the way through, if you engage in unnecessary destruction, then again you fail the mission. So it's telling you that you actually need to abide by these principles of discrimination and proportionality. Sometimes it won't fail a mission for you depending on the game, but sometimes your reward will be less. So you can get better rewards from going through without killing any civilians. Right? Perfect discrimination, or without engaging in any destruction, so perfect proportionality.
Yep. So why bother with just war in gaming? And I have to say, your presentation got me really excited because we want the same thing. You are wanting to look at the emotional development and the thinking patterns of your players, and we're wanting to do the same thing with our students. What we have, which I just suddenly realised I'm really, really lucky about, is I have direct feedback with students in the classroom because we're looking at case studies a lot, whereas you're doing it in a way more interesting way. I think they'd much rather sit down and play your game than examine case studies. But anyway, so it does got us thinking when we saw that the call came out for today about, well, why actually bother with just war in gaming? So obviously, given my background, given that I teach ethics and that I'm a minister, I actually want to encourage people to do the right thing. And so it's possibly an opportunity for people to do some self-reflection that they don't necessarily get to do in another place. If they're having to make moral decisions, it's not only about, obviously not everybody who's actually going to be paying Spec Ops the line is then going to be going to Fallujah, but they actually can be thinking about their moral development, thinking about how they're making decisions and helping them develop through that as well. But anyway, I think it is about encouraging people to do the right thing, but does it come at a kind of cost with profitability about how we can actually develop those games? But I don't think it necessarily has to be the case. For example, when people are constantly getting ganked, they get really, really sick of it because it's a justice thing. If you're playing WoW and you're on a PvP server and you're constantly getting ganked, you're going to get really, really sick of it very fast. And that is about proportionality, but more it's about discrimination, about not killing the right people. And it's about building that justice in so that people actually feel like that they're actually getting through the game without, being ripped off. So when it comes to profitability as well, this is our daughter Hannah. This is how excited she was when the new WoW expansion came out. Now, she's like me. She's not, she loves gaming, she's a huge gamer, but she doesn't really like killing a lot of things. So, when Assassin's Creed came out, she really liked going around and looking at all the pretty things and so on. But, she did it because it was a way of getting through the game. But if we could have more games that actually had serious ethical thinking and decision-making, she would love that. Now, she is a game developer's dream because, she's in the right demographic. She's also tied into her chair. So she's actually normally in a wheelchair. She's disabled. So she has lots of time to spend money with you guys. So profitability, it encourages a whole new market. Now, obviously, Hannah and myself are not the main demographic for the war market, but she actually loves that sort of stuff. So if you can develop more games that are into her area, it's not only about encouraging people to do the right thing, it can also be profitable as well because it is encouraging a different type of gamer into the wargaming community.
We also, this is our son-in-law, Hannah's husband, who plays a lot of these sorts of games. I'm not sure whether he's actually played Spec Ops The Line, but I suspect from some of the things that he was telling me when we were talking about this, I suspect he actually has. We have another son who's actually in the Air Force, and he has been telling us very excitedly for the last couple of years about new games that are coming up where he can go through the entire game and not kill anybody. And those are the games that really excite him. He likes the idea of being able to go through an entire game and not actually have to kill anybody, to achieve all the objectives by stealth, by using non-lethal means or non-violent means. So again, I think that's another thing that people are actually really interested in, or some people at least are really interested in, not just going through and blowing everything up, but going through and finding ways of doing things without actually killing people and achieving the same objectives without actually engaging in that death and destruction.